What's going on, guys? This is my post-ride review of the Honda CB750 Hornet. Now, before I dive too deep into my thoughts on this machine, I've got to send a huge shout out to Hunter and Tommy and the rest of the crew over at Stub Cycles for allowing me the opportunity to throw a leg over this machine and bring it to you. And by the way, in the description below, there will be a link to that ride-along video. Spoiler alert, I am having a blast with that bike. So what made it so good? Well, let's go over the numbers real quick. But this motorcycle, it performs better than the spec sheet may make you think that it's going to. So first of all, horsepower. The United States spec bikes are a claimed 83 horsepower. Well, after riding this bike, I can tell you that seemed a little shy. Anyway, 420 pounds full of fluids. It's got a 56-inch wheelbase and a 31-inch seat height. Now, that translates into a bike that is very accommodating for smaller riders. A 31-inch seat height means that with my 32-inch inseam, I could practically flat foot this thing. But it wasn't just that, it was how this bike carried its weight. It felt very compact, very short, and very low with how it took the weight in stride. And so this bike was incredibly flickable. In fact, in that video, I had commented that, well, it felt like I was riding a dirt bike. There was hardly any weight to feel underneath you. With a 160 section width rear tire to go along with all the specs that I just gave you, the bike just wants to just flop around underneath you. Any input is rewarded immediately. And that was one of the things that I found so endearing. Now, that's not to say that the bike was unstable. Nothing could be further from that truth. This bike was incredibly stable just going down the highway, but you always had that immediate turn-in that you're just not going to find with some of this motorcycle's contemporaries. Now, speaking of the contemporaries, it's kind of hard to talk about the Hornet 750 without talking about a couple of other motorcycles that are in its class. Because, well, you can't really say you're the best unless you are beating the rest. So how does this bike win that argument? Well, I'll put it to you like this. The MT-07 from Yamaha, which has been the darling of these kind of smaller middleweight sport naked bikes, well, that motorcycle makes far less power. And as great of a bike as it is, it can't compare with the Hornet in terms of price, because the Honda Hornet checks in at just shy of $8,000. And with that money, you get a fantastic looking TFT screen, an up and down quick shifter, some of the most fun engine characteristics that I've ridden in a long time, and it's lightweight and it's just so playful. It's kind of everything you wished your MT-07 was. Well, this is a better version of that, and it's less expensive by about $600. Now, what about the GSX-8S? How does it compare to the bigger bike in this segment? The strange thing is that the GSX-8S is simply a torquier version of the MT-07. In essence, it doesn't rev out the way that the Hornet does. The Honda Hornet has this extremely linear and seemingly limitless ability to rev. It's always got power, where the GSX-8S is a little bit different story. It really does rely more on an instant torque hit. Strange, though, that these two engines could be so vastly different in how they go about making power, because they're not that different in displacement, the Honda being just the other side of 750 cc's and the GSX-8S being 776. Both of them parallel twins, and both of them with 270-degree cranks. So what gives? Well, the Honda is much more over square. In other words, the piston diameter to stroke is favoring the piston for the Honda versus favoring the crankshaft or the stroke for the GSX-8S. In other words, it's just got a longer stroke and a smaller piston in the Suzuki versus a bigger piston and a shorter stroke for the Honda. And that basically translates to a much torquier but not very rev-friendly Suzuki and a very linear and very rev-happy Honda. So my takeaway with this bike after I got a chance to spend time with it was this. It does feel like a less substantial bike to ride. the Suzuki and even the MT-07 felt a little bit bigger in a way. It's kind of hard to explain, but I think I can make do with this analogy. The Hornet feels a lot like if you could have some of the torque of the GSX 8S and just the Honda's amount of horsepower, and you put that in the MT-07. Does that make any sense? Because all of these bikes are a little bit different, but the Hornet seems to blend the two that seem to be the most popular together. Nice torque hit, but it does like to rev out, and it will make power all the way out to the far right hand side of the tachometer, where the other bikes just don't seem to do that. So would I prefer the Hornet over the rest of the crew of these bikes? It kind of depends. It depends on what kind of rider you are. If you like bikes that are extremely flickable, very playful, very wheelie happy, and motorcycles that are going to be a bit more engaging, then the Hornet is probably going to be the right bike for you. If instead you maybe are a little bit larger in stature and you want a bike that's going to give a little bit better initial torque response, and you're not really worried so much about wrapping this motorcycle out to high RPM, well, then the Suzuki might be the better play for you. But either way, you're getting a phenomenal machine. All I can say is that my time with that Hornet 750 today was an absolute riot. And it's kind of a rarity whenever I get to ride a bike and get as giddy as I am. So if you do get a chance to see that ride along video, please forgive my enthusiasm. You know, I've never met a motorcycle that I didn't like, but in this case, God, this thing was so endearing and so playful. I could see anybody making room for one of these in their garage. It really was that good. I'm stoked that we finally got our hands on it here in the States. This thing is a real winner, and it puts the rest of the field on notice. They're going to have to step their game up to compete with that Hornet. And with that, guys, post up your comments. Let me know what you think. Thanks for stopping by. We'll catch you on the next one.